день, уважаемые участники международной конференции.
Good
Добро
morning,
пожаловать.
distinguished participants. Welcome to our section, Pedagogy, Play and Quality of Preschool Education. I am Ajana Rozanova from Nazarbayev University. I do research in the area of early years education, and I would like to say that our today's session is sponsored by OINA organization. Before we commence, I would like to give you a few points. If you have questions, please use our special applications, and at the end of the session, we will try to do our best to have a Q&A session. As for the speakers, please stick to the agenda, and whenever your time is running out, I will give you a sign. And now I would like to say a few words about early years education. As far as we know, early years education gives the best return on investment up to 13%, and it has a lot of value in terms of its effect on society, but only if it's quality education. What do we mean by quality? Well, it's a complex phenomenon, but overall it is hugely impacted by the quality of teaching that has an emphasis on play. And children play, and this is how they develop, and this is a safe environment that allows them to try different roles and scenarios and develop socially, cognitively, and physically. And play, or to be more precise, playfulness, we'll learn more about it from Glenda Walsh.
In early years and primary education, and a significant contributor to curriculum development in Northern Ireland and beyond. She is a head of early years education at Stranmillis University College and assistant director at the Center for Research in Educational Underachievement. She has undertaken many major research projects in this field. Essentially, most of her work has a strong applied focus, where she closely works with early years settings, schools, and governments by disseminating models of good practice, as well as delivering an extensive professional development programs for teachers in Northern Ireland and beyond. She has authored several publications and also was a lead editor of the book Playful Teaching and Learning, published by Sage in 2017. Today, she will talk about a very important theme, which is it is more important than just play, infusing playfulness into the teaching and learning experience in early years setting. Glenda, the stage is yours.
Seconds. And we will go back to the beginning. Okay, well, it gives me great pleasure to have been given the opportunity to share with you today some thoughts about this notion of moving beyond just play to infusing playfulness into the teaching and learning experience in the early years. I'm going to share with you work that we've been doing over the past 20 years in the context of Northern Ireland with this particular focus. So the overview of my presentation, firstly, I'm going to set the scene where I will share with you some established benefits of play for young children's learning and development. Then we're going to review the evidence together, considering the realities of play in practice from a policy, social and research perspective. And then we're going to think about this notion of a quality pedagogy, the infusion of playfulness into the teaching and learning experience. So what do we know already about those benefits of play for young children's learning and development? Well, the evidence has told us time and time again that too formal an approach to teaching and learning in the early years is wrong. Children don't learn that way, and it can actually be damaging for young children. Children learn when they're actively engaged, emotionally secure, and socially interactive. Research evidence has shown that a quality playful pedagogy can provide the holistic learning opportunity for all young learners by educating children socially, emotionally, cognitively, and physically. We also know from recent pediatric studies that play can be powerful in terms of children's academic functions likewise. And play allows children to be broad, interconnected, and dynamic, where children are not only encouraged to be happy and healthy in their lives today, but also develop the skills to be creative, engaged, lifelong learners of tomorrow. But then moving on to considering the realities of play in practice. From a policy context, early years educators, we've been lobbying for years of the importance of play-based and creative activity becoming a central tenet of political attention over a long period of time. And yes, within Western society, we've certainly received that, where we have numerous policy documents with a focus on play in the early years. But what we've been finding is that those policy versions of play aim to narrow what is possible and desirable. Experiences must be planned and purposeful, feeding into defined learning outcomes. And there's a growing body of research and policy critique that questions whether Western policy interventions are moving pedagogical practice in the early years in the direction of becoming more normalized, standardized, and mainstream as a result of those neoliberal ideals of efficiency, productivity, and competitiveness. Then, to the social context, the commercialization of play. We know that play in children's homes, more recently, children don't play the same as what they may have done 20, 30 years ago. There's this idea of junk play referring to play that is unimaginative, low-key, and contrived play resources that are frequently advertised on our TV sets for kids. This idea of plastic junk, as we call it in Northern Ireland, which really does not promote high-level learning on the part of young children. Then there's this idea that children are not allowed to be children for too long any longer. We're expecting them to grow up too quickly. And there's a kind of kidnapping of childhood in that respect. Kidnapping childhood refers to how children are no longer allowed to be children. Which particularly little girls are encouraged to wear high heels, makeup, grown-up fashion from a very young age. And then there is this idea of the technological explosion. Yes, we know how powerful technology can be, but at the same time, recent research from Australia has shown us that children spend too long in front of a screen, and as a result are not engaging in the outdoor play and the physical play that they need, and the imaginative play at this very young age. And then what's research telling us about the realities of play in practice? Well, there's a tradition of play in practice that is highly controversial and problematical. Constraints such as provision, and in terms of adults' roles, parental expectations, top-down pressures, as some of the reasons why play in practice is limited in frequency, duration, and quality. Play associated with child-centeredness and Piagetian perspectives in child development, where the role of the adult remains as an observer and facilitator of children's play. And there is this idea coming to the fore that not all play, just because you call this activity play, is actually powerful in practice in that respect. Children's cognitive capabilities in terms of their higher order thinking skills can sometimes remain underdeveloped. So we're arguing that it's more than just play. Simply providing more play-based and practical tasks does not necessarily promote and extend children's cognitive and metacognitive processes. sometimes owing to the lack of teachers' own confidence and competence in translating play into practice. Not all children have access to play, let alone good quality play in their educational setting, and play continues to hold that tenuous position in practice. And we know too well that this situation is likely to worsen in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, where teachers are asked to prioritise catching up on academic learning. So we very much see the underpinning issues as being, where teachers are concerned, they're under pressure in terms of allowing children to express their autonomy and creativity through play, but likewise providing enough challenge to ensure genuine progression in children's social, emotional, cognitive and thinking skills. And so therefore we would argue that there's a need to move towards a more balanced approach to early years teaching and learning, where playing, teaching and learning blend together in a way to ensure that relationships are powerful, emotional and social development is there, autonomy is there, content subject knowledge is within the bowl as well in that respect, and that children are fully challenged. So this is where this idea of the concept of playful teaching and learning emerges, where the answer lies in infusing playfulness into the teaching and learning experience. So what do we mean by this idea of playfulness as opposed to just play? We see playfulness as being that internal state, a set of behaviours. The internal state referring to feelings of well-being, engagement, lightheartedness, pleasure, joy. High playfulness behaviour is characterised by liveliness, expressiveness, creativity, imagination, good humour, cheerfulness, a degree of comedy, silliness at times, and a wish to share and interact with others. And we have found that it is the overall level of playfulness that ensures the overall quality of the learning experience. So infusing playfulness into practice, how do we do it? What does it look like? So I'm going to share with you some thoughts about enabling playful experiences, providing playful interactions, and last but not least, creating playful learners. So enabling playful experiences, ensuring what I love, this lovely term, hungry minds on the part of our youngest children. These are rich experiences, not superficial like experiences in the classroom, rich, deep experiences which retain their sense of enjoyment, but yet still afford opportunities for depth and challenge. The use of open-ended, authentic resources, rich in possibility and adventure. Some examples I've given here are cardboard box, or milk crates, or barrels, which transform into whatever you want it to be, rather than it being one thing and one thing only. Children get the opportunity within these playful experiences to be highly imaginative and creative. There's a spirit of investigation and inquiry throughout this kind of experience. And there are connected learning opportunities. It's not about doing literacy here, numeracy there, and maybe a little bit of the world around us somewhere else. The experiences are connected in each and every one of them. And then this lovely term, hard fun, is injected into the experiences. Fun without hardness is mere frivolity. Hardness without fun is mere drudgery. But it's a connection of bringing those both together to ensure what we want in practice. Hard fun, playful learning. So then on to the actual playful interactions themselves. The participation, the engagement, the interaction that takes place between the practitioner and the children is to perceive, to embrace the effective characteristics of play, where a degree of playfulness is infused into the teaching experience. So what do I mean with this idea of playful interactions? Yes, playful interactions are light-hearted in perspective, despite the learning outcomes sometimes being quite serious. They afford opportunities for spontaneity, risk-taking, and thinking outside the box. Yet they drip-feed curriculum content at every opportune moment. And they ensure a high level of interest, energy, and enthusiasm on the part of both parties, that is, children and adults, whilst blending in challenge, extension, and progression in the process. So what do playful interactions look like? Well, this approach assumes a climate of reciprocal relationships within the setting, so that observation, reflection, and discussion occurs easily within this collaborative ethos. And some roles that the adult might take on in terms of making these interactions more playful. Yes, she might be a listener, she might be a facilitator to what's going on in the classroom. She might be an observer, but in so doing, she must also be a reflector. She is a co-learner and a co-explorer in the process likewise, a co-designer, a co-planner alongside the children. She's also a model and a guide, but likewise a co-player, getting in there, playing alongside the children, and in so doing, drip feeding the learning into that experience. So when we have playful experiences and we have playful interactions, then our research has found we also have playful learners. Playfulness in teaching and learning ensures higher levels of child engagement. Children want to do it. It's an innate experience. It also ensures higher levels of creative thinking on the part of the children, and likewise higher levels of emotional well-being. Exactly what we want to see in each and every one of our early years settings. So it's much more than just play. The time is right, therefore, for all involved in early years education to be key actors and work together to move beyond narrow, superficial, and low-level interpretations of play and practice. This idea, sure, just play, and instead embrace a much more advanced and sophisticated appreciation of play as playful pedagogies, to inspire more playful children and in turn more engaged learners in our early years settings. Surely our youngest children deserve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenda, for your presentation. That's really so insightful and so interesting. I loved this concept of playfulness that you were talking about. And indeed, our children deserve more playful experience in preschool, as it could unleash their potential. But unfortunately, we have this culture of academization in early childhood education. And even though teachers understand the importance of play, they usually prioritize the structured activities over free play. But certainly, teachers need more support in implementing this playful teaching and learning. There are some questions, but we could discuss those after all presentations. And our next presentation is by Pablo Torres. Pablo is an educational and developmental psychologist specializing in primary school years. His research looks at the relationship between social interaction found in play and pedagogy and children's mindset for learning, social and cognitive development. He is also interested in studying how technology can promote children's development. And in the past, Pablo has worked as a research associate at UCL and a postdoctoral fellow at Cambridge. Currently, Pablo is a British academic postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Cambridge. His presentation is Culturally Effective Teaching for the Development of Students' Self-Regulation. What does evidence tell us?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Pablo Torres. I am a British Academy postdoctoral fellow here at the Faculty of Education, University of Cambridge. And in this presentation, I will talk about culturally effective teaching and parenting strategies for the development of students and children's self-regulation. In particular, I will present what the evidence tells us. Now, despite well-recognized cultural variations in social practices and pedagogic traditions, it seems to be widely assumed that young people everywhere can best be taught in the same ways. But new research, including my own and the Talis PISA-Link study, have started to reveal that the same teaching strategies can have culturally specific, even opposing effects on child and adolescent learning and skill development. The present study looks at this phenomenon for the particular case of self-regulation development. But why focusing on promoting self-regulation? Self-regulation is a core capacity for human development and learning. Self-regulation refers to people's capacity to regulate their own cognition, motivation, behavior towards the successful completion of a goal. It is considered one of the most important skills for learning and the key to unlock the development of other skills. To focus on improving self-regulation is also very strategic because interventions in its development are considered among the most impactful and cheapest to implement. The question I am aiming to answer in this study is, how do cognitive, social, emotional, and motivational features of teacher, student, and parent-child interactions associate to children's and adolescent development of self-regulation across cultures? In order to answer this question, I conducted a systematized literature review based on two large academic databases, highly used within psychology, PsycInfo and Web of Science. I applied the following syntax to find relevant journal articles to my research question. You can see the syntax below there. One part of this syntax focused on culture, another on parenting and teaching, and a third one on self-regulation skills and behaviors. This search strategy generated 834 entries in PsycInfo and 290 entries in Web of Science. Following duplicate deletion and exclusion of entries that were not journal articles, a total of 800 entries were identified. The titles and abstracts of these entries were screened to judge if the studies could answer the target research question. 14 relevant journal articles were identified and reviewed. Cognitive, emotional, and behavioral facets of self-regulation were considered as relevant outcomes of interest. Of the 14 studies identified, 7 studied self-regulation of cognitive processes and 7 studied self-regulation of emotions and socially appropriate behaviors. That is, compliance with social requests and prohibitions, as well as hyperactivity. The studies were carried out with people from 14 different countries, and the most studied countries were the USA, China, the UK, Japan, and Chile, as you can see in this table. As can be seen here, overall, the studies included a total of 2,797 children across cultures and researched adult-child interactions with 3-month-olds to 14-year-olds. From this, it is interesting to note the lack of research among secondary school students. The years of the studies show that 10 out of 14 studies have been conducted since 2014, indicating that this is a relatively new area of research. Now, the results. In this section, I summarize the results of the studies reviewed, but please note that these studies have not yet been assessed in terms of the research quality formally, but most of them could be said to be robust in terms of their methodology, which tended to be cross-sectional, longitudinal, as well as based on interventions. Adult-child interactions tended to be measured using either observations or parent and teacher reports. Children's self-regulation was studied through observations as well, formal testing, or parent and teacher reports. In this table, you can see a summary of comparative studies looking at the relationship between teaching and parenting practices and cognitive self-regulation, which include metacognition, executive functions, and self-regulation behaviors. The last columns indicate if the results evidence either culturally specific effects or culturally invariant effects of teaching and parenting on child self-regulation. 5 out of the 7 of these studies reported culturally specific effects of parenting or teaching. Only 2 out of these 7 studies reported culturally invariant effects. The features of parenting or teaching found to have cultural specific, at times opposing effects were adult directiveness, guidance, autonomy support, teaching, student closeness and conflict, and strategy training. Now, the features that were found to have culturally invariant effects include parental emotion talk and autonomy support. It is noteworthy that these 2 latter studies compared Chinese and North American cultures generally considered very different in the literature. Let's look at these features one by one. First, we have adult directiveness. This refers to the extent to which adults command or overtly direct children. Across studies, adult directiveness was found to associate with higher self-regulation in China, but not to be relevant for self-regulation in Chile or the USA, and indeed associated to lower self-regulation in the UK. So let's look now at adult guidance. That is the extent to which adults provide hints, focus children's attention, or guide children's thinking to help them without commanding. Adult guidance has been found to associate to higher self-regulation in China, Chile, and the UK, but not to be relevant for self-regulation in the USA. We now turn to examine autonomy support. This feature refers to how much adults encourage independence in children. Autonomy support has demonstrated to associate to higher self-regulation in Chile, China, and the US, but to be counterproductive for self-regulation in the UK. The next features reviewed are teacher-student closeness and conflict. Teacher-student closeness and conflict refer to relational closeness or conflict found between teachers and students in the classroom. Teacher-student closeness has been found to associate to higher self-regulation in Turkey, but not to be relevant for it in the USA. On the contrary, teacher-student conflict has been found to associate to lower self-regulation skills in the USA, but not be relevant for self-regulation in Turkey. Furthermore, teacher strategy training, that is, training students to think more strategically, applying cognitive or metacognitive strategies, has been found to improve self-regulation in the USA and Denmark, but not make a difference for self-regulation in Germany and even worsening self-regulation in Japan. Finally, one study found culturally invariant positive effects of parental emotion talk, found in their joint book reading with their 7-year-olds. This study found that when migrant Chinese American parents of first and second generation use emotion words, offer explanation, and ask questions related to emotions to their children, these predicted higher self-regulation skills, specifically attentional persistence and inhibitory control, 2 years later in their children. The results are same as found in other white American groups. It is possible, however, that by basing this study in migrants, the results of this study might be due to acculturation rather than cultural invariance of the effects of parental emotion talk. As a conclusion, I would say in general, the results show that teaching and parenting practices tend to have cultural specific effects on children's development of cognitive self-regulation. Now, in this table, you can see a summary of comparative studies looking at the relationship between teaching and parenting practices and emotion regulation, which refers to the regulation of negative emotions, as well as behavioral compliance. This is compliance with adults' requests and prohibitions and levels of hyperactivity. Again, the last column indicates if the results indicate evidence either culture-specific effects or culturally invariant effects of teaching and parenting on these facets of child self-regulation. All the studies carried out with regards to emotion regulation and behavioral compliance examine the role of parenting rather than the role of teaching on children's self-regulation. There is therefore a lack of studies looking at the effect of teacher-student interactions on children's and adolescent development of emotion regulation and behavioral compliance. The research on emotion regulation shows that in newborns and in toddlers, parenting can have culture-specific effects. But by the time children reach 10 years of age, same parenting practices could also show culturally invariant effects. The studies examine the effects of general maternity sensitivity, maternal restrictive control, maternal directions and guidance, such as directiveness, self-regulation, and autonomy support. As you can see here, the results show that depending on culture, both autonomy support and maternal directiveness can promote emotion regulation. Similarly, depending on culture, maternal sensitivity might have positive or a negative effect on emotion regulation. But there are also some practices that could have culturally invariant effect on emotion regulation, such as the positive effect of physical contact in newborns and the negative effects of maternal punishment and requesting compliance without reasoning among 10-year-olds. Let's look at each of these features separately again. Parental autonomy support within play situations, for example, was found to relate to higher self-regulation in infants and toddlers among white families from the USA, whereas parental directiveness associates to higher self-regulation among Chinese Vietnamese from the USA in the same situations. Interestingly, playing together in a synchronous fashion, that is engaging in shared regulation, does not seem to be related to higher levels of self-regulation among Japanese children at this young age. But the evidence also suggests that when children are older, 10 years of age, restrictive levels of maternal control characterized by punishment and compliance without reasoning could be counterproductive for children's emotion regulation development, leading to more expression of anger across very different cultural contexts, such as Chile and Germany. The effects is stronger in Germany, however, which indicates that this maternal behavior can be more or less damaging depending on culture. Furthermore, maternal sensitivity with infants, that is when parents use appropriate, warm, and well-attuned responsiveness to infant cues, has been associated with more adaptive emotion regulation strategies later in toddlerhood among white European cultures, such as in the UK and among white South Africans. Surprisingly, however, maternal sensitivity associates to maladaptive emotion regulation strategies among Black South African toddlers. Also, different types of maternal soothing strategies with newborns related to different emotion regulation strategies in toddlerhood across cultures. In particular, social soothing, such as singing, talking, shushing, had negative effects for white South Africans, whereas dismissal of distress via distraction attempts, practical caretaking like changing nappies, and ignoring the distressed infant associates to higher maladaptive emotion regulation strategies among Black South African toddlers. It is interesting to note, however, that both these negative associations are counteracted when parents use physical soothing strategies such as feeding, or providing a pacifier, rocking, patting, stroking, which therefore could be said to have a protective, effect for emotion regulation across cultures. And finally, the review also provided clear insights into the importance of culture in parenting that promotes or lowers behavioral compliance among children. I won't go into details here due to time restrictions, but as shown in the previous table, 4 out of 5 studies evidence culturally invariant effects of parenting strategies on children's behavioral compliance. As can be seen here, these studies indicate that more controlling parenting leads to lower compliance and higher hyperactivity in 3 to 10-year-old children. Being a close and responsive parent who uses reasons to negotiate with children, and also a parent that guides children in gentle and playful ways, seems to lead to higher compliance among 1 to 10-year-olds in most cultures studied. There are exceptions, however, with Palestine being a case in point. Here, what did have a positive effect on child compliance, at least with regards to prohibitions, was when parents and children did things together jointly as a team, engaging therefore in shared regulation. Now, here are the summary and general conclusions of the study. The objective of this review was to find out if parenting and teaching strategies can be considered to have universal or culture-specific effects on children's and adolescents' self-regulation. The review shows that most teaching and parenting strategies studied have a culture-specific effect on cognitive and emotional facets of children's self-regulation, but a culturally invariant effect on behavioral compliance and hyperactivity. There are gaps in the literature worth mentioning. The studies did not provide evidence that could account for why cultural specificity or universality happens, but many reviewed authors anticipate that it could be due to differences in cultural values and beliefs. It could also be due to the way in which particular teaching and parenting behaviors fit with the developmental goals of the culture. This review calls for future research to focus on exploring the reasons underlying the importance of culture for strategy use, for the strategies we use to promote self-regulation. I also call to expand this type of cultural research into classrooms for the case of emotional regulation and behavioral compliance, and to incorporate the study of high school students with regards to this cultural phenomenon in general. My current British Academy postdoctoral fellowship will aim at providing more evidence in relation to both of these points. And to finish, I would like to highlight the implications of all this body of literature for policy and practice. The review calls for caution among teachers and parents in the adoption of teaching and parenting strategies known to work in foreign cultures within their own home cultures. It also calls for policymakers to invest more in local and comparative research to learn what works within each culture, or in different ethnic and migrant groups within their countries. This is the only way we can learn about which educational programs, if any, could be adopted from overseas rather than developed locally. That's that from me. Thank you very much for your attention.
That's an amazing presentation, and I think that's an example of a very rigorous study with a strong methodology, and it's interesting topic about the cultural effective teaching. And I wish we could explore this topic in depth in the context of Kazakhstan. I think it's very important point that we should be careful when we are borrowing some practices and policies, because there is culture and context which shapes our understanding and beliefs and the implementation process as well. And one of the participants commented that it's very interesting to learn how in different cultures their self-regulation is developed. And thank you, Pablo, for this presentation. Our next speaker is Gohar Kiyokowa. Gohar Kiyokowa, председатель правления Института детства ОЙНА.
Chair of OINA Childhood Institute, and she specializes in early years education. And currently she is a doctorate student at Nazarbayev University. She is one of her academic interests is government policy and education, and now she will give us more information about the research study she's done about quality education, and her presentation is early years education in Kazakhstan. Some news to let you know what it is that's going on in early years education in Kazakhstan. And because I think now everybody is asking the same question after this two presentation, what is Kazakhstan doing in order to improve the quality of education in Kazakhstan, and how do we provide those playful opportunities in early years education, and also how do we do research in that area? Last year, the government launched a special program, a manager training program, which established several programs, several teams, 5 teams for education, and I was the leader of one of the programs, and our goal was to improve the quality of preschool education. So we needed to come up with a program. We spent 6 months doing that. We worked jointly with the Ministry of Education. We did surveys and did several studies that allowed us to see what was going on in education at the moment. And we came up with a project that we called Balapan 2.0, and we have made several points. The first one to proclaim 2022 the year of children in Kazakhstan. Then we need to come up with a special government policy in early years education. Then we need to establish an early years institute. Then do capacity building. After that, to introduce independent assessment and evaluation. And number 5, to create a new model of early years education. Those were the 5 ideas we proposed. Some of them were accepted. And currently, 2021 saw a new model approved by the government. That model introduced a special concept of holistic development, needs of children, developing environment, supportive relationships, and quality interactions. Plans have been laid for the transformation of the system of early education in the country, and criteria were introduced. So the principles we introduced are very universal, and of course, as it was said, we need to be careful when trying to implement international experience. But there are some universal principles that we believe need to be at the very core of our model, such as children's rights, integrated approach. We need to have teachers as facilitators instead of giving directives, and learning needs to be done through play. We need to have meaningful interactions. We need to have inclusive environments, and care needs to be helping children develop. We need to help them develop in all manners and respect their personalities. We also need to respect human rights, understand that the difficulties they face, we need to be open to everything new, we need to have research going on, and children need to have a diversity of experiences and equal access to education. Currently, the state standard is being updated. One of the initiatives we proposed too. So instead of requirements requiring children to do things, we want to have requirements that would describe the way process needs to be established, and we need children to develop holistically. We need to take children's needs into account, because, well, curriculum is one thing, but each and every child is unique, and their needs, so are their needs. We also describe different kinds of play. For instance, Glenda today mentioned the idea that there are different kinds of play, because, well, you can just waste time on playing, but there is meaningful play, and that's what we need to have. And the standard is also going to introduce values and principles. It hasn't been approved yet, but hopefully it will be, and we will have a document that will make a difference. One of the ideas we had, we also saw the OECD, for instance, doing the same thing. They did a review of the education system in Kazakhstan, and they saw that there were no criteria, and that criteria needed to be developed. That's why we came up with the idea that a special national evaluation system be established by the year 2025. But first of all, we need to take a look at the state of the system at the moment. That's why we are using ESARS, a special instrument. I will tell you about it later. So we already started working. First of all, we do expert review. Then we do parent surveys based on special Eckers questionnaire. And number 3 is teacher survey using a special scale. So this is a 3-year project aiming to assess the quality of the preschool education in the country. And as a final result, we will have a set of criteria. Now I would like to give you some preliminary results. So I need to mention it that we still have 2 months for data collecting, and the results of the analysis will be presented next year, but we have some preliminary findings, and since there is a lot of interest towards our study, I think I need to give you the information we have so far. So this instrument is called Early Childhood Environment Rating Scale. So what we do is take a look at the environment our children are in, and there are 6 subscales, and overall it has 35 key indicators and 468 indicators, which cover everything. So physical, social, emotional, cognitive aspects, as well as safety and health. So it either gives you a score of 1, which is unsatisfactory, 3, minimally acceptable, 5, which is good, and 7, excellent. I would like to draw attention to the fact that there are no early years organizations that can be given all 7s. It's impossible, but that's what we need to aim for. And this scale was developed in the 80s by American academics. It's been updated several times since then. It's been evidence-based. And it covers all the aspects of preschool education. So here are the subscales: environment, care, speech and literacy, types of activity, interaction, and program structuring. And we, the OINA organization, we've been doing special webinars. Each week we do one of the subscales. Here you see our sample. It's a part of the sample we used for the study, but overall I think it's quite representative of the whole sample. And what we see is that overall the quality is below 3. And if we take a look at the subscales, then we will see that the average score is 1.7, care is 2.2, literacy almost 2, types of activity 1.3, interaction almost 2, and program structuring a little bit higher than 2. And overall, well, the average is 1.86. So we have many things we could improve, and this scales, it doesn't only assess the environment in terms of what you have, for instance, books, tables, and so on and so forth. No, but if it is high levels of quality we're talking about, it's all about interaction. Child-adult interaction, how much play children have, what kind of choices they have, how to resolve conflict, and so on and so forth. Here, you can see some comparisons. In the blue, you can see what certified experts have said, and to become a certified expert, you need to be evaluated, and then the color orange, this is self-assessment, and gray, in the gray you see what the parents have said, so you see that the parents and teachers think highly of the preschool organizations. Why? Well, maybe because they don't really know what high quality is, because you need to have some base of reference. And since we don't really have any criteria that would describe quality, since we don't really have good understanding, nor do we have a description of quality, that's why it's difficult to assess the situation. And in this, the red line is what the minimally accepted quality is supposed to be, and we are below that. What we have seen is that schools are lacking in equipment, not enough toys, little variety, toys are broken, or there are toys, but children are not allowed to play with those. As for free time for play and choosing and choice of activity, it's not in the curriculum, and academics say that, well, in our curriculum they have some parts of the day dedicated to that, but we are mostly focused on the academic aspects of the curriculum, but it's not effective in children when children are that young. Another thing is that is hygiene and care. Quite often it leaves a lot to desire, and that wasn't what I expected. I thought that, well, at least hygiene is something that we would be expected to have, but because, well, everybody washes hands, but usually it's done in a hurry, despite the fact that it's important and we need to have a greater focus on that. As for safety, well, it's not that great as well. Quite often we see different cleaning liquids next to the children, and besides, if it is outside, if it is a playground we are talking about, then quite often there are no protective surfaces, such as rubber surfaces, for instance. And I don't know, maybe we don't really have any standards for that, but it's something that is supposed to be there. And another thing is that there are very few or no interesting books, and books are seldom read, even if there are some. Very little room is made for individual approaches in education. We have very little interaction between, very little child-teacher interaction. Even if there is time, this time is not used to interact with children, and teachers usually, the staff usually avoid resolving children's conflicts. So what they usually do is they just say, well, stop it, will you stop it? Or say something, ask them to say what happened, but they don't really start talking about it, trying to understand what those children feel. And the most difficult thing is said to be teacher-parent interaction. Why? Because, well, parents don't really know what's going on in the organization, and that's why they say that, well, we don't know what's going on, what equipment they have, what they do, and that's why you can only use photo reports from the organizations, but that's not good enough. Thank you for your attention, and please feel free to join our webinars if you are interested in the acres scale. We'll give you all the information you need. Thank you, Gohar, for your presentation. And as one of the participants has said, well, you are bringing light to such important things, and we need to go further to see the big picture of what's going on in Kazakhstan. Fully agree, and it's a good thing that now we are paying great attention to early years education, and Gohar, you are a great contributor to that, and it's good to see the first studies in that area. Hopefully we'll have more of those, because otherwise we won't be able to know where to go, in which direction. And now let's do Q&A. We have several questions. We'll try to do at least several of them. The first one is for Glenda.
The question was actually from Gohar, and she was asking you, like, she says, like, thank you for the amazing presentation. I would like to ask you, why is Lego also considered to be like plastic play? And do you think it doesn't provide enough room for creativity? It would be great to hear your thoughts on that. Glenda?
Okay. Well, I think I must say, firstly, that Lego is a really useful resource. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that you don't buy Lego for your young children or whatever. I certainly did for my boys. But I have been around for a long time and old enough to remember play of Lego in the past, where it was much more open-ended in style, and children got Lego and decided what they wanted to build with Lego. I think my point was, in my notes, what I was meaning to some extent over the years, Lego now, you buy a box of Lego and you build whatever resource somebody else has decided you should build with the Lego blocks, rather than what comes from within the child, him or herself. And I do remember my own boys really enjoying building what was there, but at times then they wanted to build something else with the particular Lego materials that were there, and then got quite frustrated when they realized there were only 4 little black ones or whatever it might be, and they wanted more of that particular item. So not suggesting that Lego is bad for your children by any means, definitely not. But at the same time, I do see that it's moving in a direction whereby you buy a box of Lego to build a certain resource rather than an open-ended idea.
Yeah, thank you, Glenda, for your response. And I heard from one scholar from New Zealand that children enjoy doing Lego because they're like spending this time with parents, they're constructing together, and they're really enjoying this interaction going on.
Exactly. Very much so.
Yeah. Thank you. We have here another question about the playfulness. One of the participants is asking, so how many percent should be free play in the kindergarten, like during the day, on your opinion?
Well, again, the evidence would suggest that there should be a balance between free play, child-initiated play, and then more adult-initiated play in that respect. So very much a balance between the two. But I do feel that the research is showing very much so over the years that whether it is free play and the children can play whatever they want to play with particular resources, etc., that there does need to be some form of adult involvement, not the adult telling them what to do and how to do it, but the adult available to extend their language, the adult available to extend their thinking at times as well. And I do feel we're very much moving towards a direction whereby adults aren't just mere facilitators to stand in the background and always observe simply what the children are doing. They are there to interact with the children during those playful experiences, whether they come from within the child or whether they're more initiated by the adult, but there should be a definite balance within that day.
Yeah, thank you for your response. Actually, recently I was reading a paper, and Helen Hedges was writing about this, like different types of playing. There are like participatory, like over participatory, or less like unparticipatory, but also like appropriately participatory. So there are different types of play and involvement of adults in this process. And yeah, I agree totally that there should be a balance. So we have next question to Pablo, it was written that it's very important question and very complicated, not all adults have this self-regulation skills. So what other like approaches do you think the most effective for development of self-regulation for children of early age?
Well, what the evidence is showing is that, from a very early age, the most important thing, in the first years of lives, the socio-emotional aspect of development, right? So, and what I found in my review is that, being more like caring of your child in terms of physical contact with the child at that age is very important. It's going to have an important impact later on in life. So if you care, like physically, regardless whether you interact verbally with your child or not, the physical element is very important, and it will definitely predict higher self-regulation, at 3, 4, 5 years of age. But then probably you have to combine that with a more cognitive input when they are a bit older, and that, I think, the effect of that will depend on culture. So what exactly you do with that more cognitive input, it will depend on the values of your culture. So for example, there are some studies that showed the difference between Israel and Palestine, and how, if you are playing with your child in a more distal way, as in like having your child in front of you and playing with them, interacting, explaining things, like offering certain objects so they can keep playing independently, that has a good impact in Israel, but that doesn't have necessarily a good impact in Palestine. And what they found, it was that when you play together with your child at that age, in that culture, that has an impact for better self-regulation in your child. So that tells you that, for example, the value of collectivism or individualism has an important bearing in this issue. And it's not just because, we like being with others or we like doing things on our own. It's because we develop ourselves, our understanding of self in relation to our own or others. And that's, we need to start understanding those dynamics. And also cultural beliefs will have an important bearing into this. What you think is good and what you think is bad for your child. What I'm finding is that, if you do things that are within the logic of your culture, because self-regulation on its own, what it is your capacity to adapt to a context and to achieve goals within that context. So if you start doing things that are, seen as a positive thing within your culture, most likely you will be promoting self-regulation in your child. There are some exceptions, however. So there are some cultures that would, they would value the non-expression of emotions in children. And I think that those kind of values can also actually be damaging regardless of cultural contexts. And there is evidence showing that in the case of the South African study, that was showing that, Black South Africans tend to try to promote non-expression of emotions. The same happens in some Asian countries. So that can actually have a detrimental effect in your children.
That's great, thank you. That's so interesting. And this point about the non-expression of emotions, it would be really interesting to find out what is it is like in our context of Kazakhstan. And my next question to Gohar, specifically about our context. What do you think in our culture, how the early childhood education perceived its purpose, what its purpose and the vision, who the child is, and even about this self-regulation topic. So those non-expression of emotion, is it do we have it in our culture or not? So your ideas related to our context.
That was a very complicated, multi-layered question, Ajan, but I'll try my best. I do see that children are not allowed to express emotions. During this study, when we go into preschools to observe, every time I see whenever a child cries, the teacher says, don't cry. If a boy cries, the teacher says, boys don't cry. If a girl cries, the teacher says, it's not nice for a girl to be crying. So it is very, very pronounced, and I really don't like it. And it's not only about crying, it's also about laughing out loud. Girls shouldn't laugh very loud. I've heard that. Or don't be too energetic. Whoever can't sit for a long time automatically are talked about like hyperactive, although they are just children who want to run around and play. So that is really pronounced in our culture. And I think because our secondary education has become so competitive, and we do have some schools that to get into first grade, you have to take tests and you have to take exams, and children are being prepared for it 2-3 years in advance. And parents are very much pushing their children to get ready, to know how to write, how to read, how to count, everything that they are going to be asked. And of course, preschools, especially those that are private, they need their clients, and because their clients ask to prepare their children for school in this way, academic way, they are doing this more and more, not letting children play, or not choosing, playful ways to teach children. Instead, they are putting children at the desks. And I've seen a lot of every class that I've been to, the preschool group, they all have a designated place with desks and with the board. That's a study place. And then there's really small place that's a play place, and the play happens only in between lessons, and they are called lessons. They are called, we are having a break from lesson, and they're called lessons. And this is really, I find it really sad and devastating that children are being put into such a situation, even when they aren't 6 yet. I've seen children of age 3 being done that, and that's really, shows that we do not take childhood as a separate time for children, as the time that they have different experiences from school. We only take it as time to prepare children for school, and preparation is only academic.
Yeah, thank you, Gohar. It's really very sad for me as well. because my son is attending one of the best kindergartens, but still there are issues with free play, with this skills and with self-regulation. And yeah, but hopefully with this research going on and with all these initiatives going on in Kazakhstan, we will improve the situation. So unfortunately, we don't have time for other questions because we are running out of time. And thank you very much for your contribution. It was great. I enjoyed myself listening to you and discussing this topic. And yeah, thank you a lot. I would like to remind to participants that tomorrow we will have another session on early childhood education where our local practitioners and experts will share the results of their studies as well. And so, yeah, everyone is invited to this session. Once again, thank you for all speakers for their contribution and their presentations. And now we have a break for lunch according to the program. And after that, we will have a plenary session. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.